Hi, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I thought today I'd do another book review on one of my favourite Australian photographers. I only ever met this person in person once, although I don't know if I actually met him. I went to a talk that he was giving to a camera club many years ago in Adelaide. And at that time, he was a farmer who lived on a property down the southeast of South Australia. And apart from his farming activities, he was a very avid photographer, particularly of birds of prey and other animals as well. And I went along to this talk because it had been advertised in the paper, I think. It was held by the Adelaide Camera Club, which one of my friends was a member of. I went along there and I was absolutely enthralled. He gave a audio-visual talk of what he was doing. He was, I'll read a little bit about him in this book that I've got of his today. But yeah, he was using wide-angle lenses to take photos of birds of prey, not your usual telephoto stuff. He was setting up hides with wide-angle lens in them and capturing them coming in and making himself familiar. You know, the birds became so familiar with him that they were not spooked. And he did other things with, in the days before we had all these camera traps we can get hold of now, he also had radio sensitive systems set up to capture animals at night. And one of the ones he showed that night, I don't think it's in this book, but it probably is on his website somewhere. I'm going to put a link below to his website. His organization is called Wildflight, I think it is. But anyway, there'll be a link underneath for that. But one of the ones he set up, he realized that he had these urns or steel urns of grain, and he realized they were going down, and he didn't realize that there were mice in there and eating them. And also he decided to, I think he must have observed, I can't remember how it went, but anyway, to cut a long story short, he set up a camera trap in the actual urn and filmed this, the last moments of a mouse being taken by an owl, and at night by flashlight. And it's just the most incredible shots I'd ever seen. And so I was enthralled by him. So when I came across his book many years later, called this one here, called Wild and Free by Nicholas Birks, I decided I had to get that. It's a beautiful coffee table book. I've got 2 copies of this. I did have another one at one stage, but I gave a copy to a friend. Whenever I see this in a secondhand shop, I usually buy it. And it's a beautiful book. Australia's Natural World Through the Lens of Nicholas Birks. And the story of Nicholas Birks is really interesting. And not only was he a top farmer, but he was also a brilliant athlete. And for many years, he was a Commonwealth javelin champion of the Commonwealth of Nations, or the nations that belong to Britain, of course. And I don't know that he ever went in the Olympic Games, but he was an incredible javelin thrower. And he also a decathlete, and he won medals in these games and world championships and everything. But you'll read about that on his website probably, and it's also in the book here. So he's still going, as far as I can see. His website's still active, and you can buy, he sells postcards and things, and you may be able to buy some of his prints from his website. So I'll just read a little bit from the book, and I'm going to show you a few photos afterwards of what's on the screen as well. Just bear with me for a second. The foreword to this book is actually by John Landy, or the introduction to it. Yeah, the foreword by John Landy, who was a famous Australian athlete, later a politician. He only died just recently. And he was the second person to ever run the 4-minute mile. He was very much in competition with Roger Bannister. So he was an Olympic athlete who later became a politician, but he was also a popular photographer. And I think a friend of Nicholas Birks as well, because they both had a connection in athletics as well as photography. So there's a wonderful foreword there by John Landy. And I'll just read a little bit of what he says. This is a natural history book with a difference. There are no posed static shots, but page after page of superb photographs showing birds, animals, reptiles and insects in action. An osprey gliding to its nest, kangaroos mid-hop, and speeding bats frozen in flight in an instant of time. I first heard of Nicky Birks as an athlete in the late 1950s, although he competed some years after I retired. People spoke of this country lad at the national championships who, with a minimum of prior competition, took out the Australian javelin throwing title. He continued to do this regularly for several years and won medals at the Commonwealth Games in Perth 1962 and Jamaica in 1966. In between time, he won 3 Australian decathlon titles, a most exacting event which involves 10 separate disciplines. Anyway, it's a wonderful foreword by John Landy, and it's a great book. I'll just see if I can read a little bit of Nick's own words in the front of this. If you can indulge me, I'll read a fair bit of this because it's fascinating what he's got to say. Okay, where are we? I have spent most of my life observing nature and learning the habits of mammals and birds, particularly birds of prey. I try to work away from nest sites as much as possible, as some birds are very sensitive. I encourage them to come close enough for me to use a wide-angle lens, which allows the subject to be part of the environment. This can take months or even years to achieve. My aim is to photograph a complete natural history of all the birds I've studied. The period after fledgling of the young, when they are learning to fend for themselves, is particularly fascinating. One thing that stands out in most landscape photography is the lack of animal life. This is due to the small aperture and slow shutter speed used in taking that type. This is done, of course, in the days long before digital. This is due to the small aperture and slow shutter speed used in taking that type of photograph. Even if a bird flew across the scene, it would not register on the film. Stalking wildlife with a long telephoto lens is not my style. The resulting photographs contain birds and animals with frightened expressions, looking back over their shoulders, and it is difficult to get the subject facing or moving in towards the camera. Using a normal or wide-angle lens has an advantage over a telephoto one because it does not have to be moved to follow the progress of the subject. The slightest movement of a long lens will frighten most birds. The use of sound deadening material to reduce the noise of the camera shutter is important at close range. I tend to concentrate on one subject in an area, which often leads to others in the vicinity. The hide is usually situated away from nests. Often the birds need no food, just a high perch from which to keep watch. For many years, I consistently fed a wild pair of peregrine falcons and was able to observe much of their natural hunting technique from a tower 15 metres high, placed in open country. In the autumn and early winter, after they had driven off their young from the previous season, the pair hunted together and would often sit on the top of the hide, using it as an observation perch from which to hunt. And I'll just read this next little bit. By climbing into the hide very early in the morning, I beat their arrival, which was often before sunrise. The pair would often sit only centimetres above my head, preening and shuffling about. Sometimes I could actually feel their needle-sharp talons through the canvas on my skull. There you go. That's dedication to getting the shot. Anyway, this book is enthralling, and it's not only birds and birds of prey. And he has written another bird of prey book or a book that was produced by Penny Olsen, who's a well-known Australian bird enthusiast who's produced many books on natural history and particularly birds, and he is a friend of Penny Olsen's apparently. So there is a book on birds of prey by Penny Olsen where most of the photos in that book are actually from Nicholas Birks. So I could take you through this. I've got a few shots. I just took a few shots and I'm going to just show a little bit of a slideshow at the end of it. It's quite a big book. And that's an echidna and some kangaroos. There you are. There's the famous bilby there. That is rare, but they're trying to introduce them back into the wild. They're Australia's. They use these instead of promoting rabbits as Easter bunnies. They have Easter bilbies these days. That one there, I think, is a bustard. Let's have a look. Oh no, sorry, it's a white-faced heron. There you go. So it's a beautiful book, and I would recommend if you can get hold of a copy of this. It's got all the traditional Australian birds, you know, kookaburras and koalas and all that sort of stuff as well. But a fascinating book, a brilliant photographer, and I'd highly recommend you look him up and follow the links underneath to what I've got there. I'm just going to try and now share the screen and see if I can find these other prints that I've got here somewhere. Let's have a look. I'll just get these up. Whoops, no, we don't want to do that. Wait a minute. Just select all of them. We'll pump them up and we'll view full screen. So let's just go back. Okay, so these are some white ibis. These are just shots. That's the cover of the book. And just laid it out on top of my Epson printer and scanner, Western grey kangaroo. It's got footnotes down the bottom there. You can see down, or yeah, you can't see my cursor there, but he's got footnotes about the cameras that he used, I think, and where they were taken in a lot of these. Banded Stilts. So no, he hasn't got the details of the cameras he was using in there, but I'll show you one of the cameras he was using at the end of this little slideshow. How's that? Beautiful shots of banded stilts in flight. It's a wolf spider. Close up. Shingleback lizard, or sleepy lizards as we call them. We have a relative of that lizard that lives in our backyard called the blue-tongue lizard, which is similar to that, but it doesn't have all those scales on the back. It's a smooth lizard, but it's got a blue tongue, similar size, and they're quite popular in right around Australia, and in the suburban houses we have those in our backyard. You have to go out a bit further into the bush to see the sleepy lizards. There's a bat coming in. This is one of those ones where he's frozen it with the radio-controlled setup that he invented or set up himself. That's the ibis again. Sulphur-crested cockatoo, very common Australian cocky in Australia. And there's a close-up of that shot. And here we are talking about the peregrine falcons coming in to the hide and sitting up there and feeling it coming through onto his head. And I love that shot. Olympus OM4 Ti, which was quite, I contemplated buying one of those back in the day, a film camera. One of the advantages of those cameras was that back then when you had problems with flash sync speeds, you could get a flash that went with that camera and get all flash speeds all the way up to a 1/4000th or 1/8000th of a second flash sync speed with those. So they were pretty good cameras. That's a little superb blue wren, I think that one is. So there you go. Come back to me now. So I would thoroughly recommend if you, and follow the links underneath, and there's probably a lot of Australian photographers that are well known to some of us who are enthusiasts in Australia, but not necessarily to overseas people. So I don't know how much presence Nick Birks has got on YouTube or anywhere else for that matter, but certainly it's a wonderful book and he's an amazing photographer. And you can learn much by reading some of the things that he did to him get the shots that he got, you know, and using the equipment that he was using. He's probably using digital cameras now, I wouldn't know, but look him up. I'll have a look afterwards and have a look at his website. So there you go. Thanks for watching, and subscribe if you wish, like if you like, and I'll see you next time.